So I was born and raised in Garissa, which is on the eastern part of Kenya. It's on along the Kenya-Somali border. It's an area inhabited by ethnic Somali group, which is a group widespread across the whole of the Horn of Africa region. So there's a Kenyan population or Kenyan Somalis on the northeastern part of Kenya. And there are 3 counties there, Garissa, Mandera, Wajir. So I was born in Garissa, which is on the lower side, bordering Lamu. And I was born to a nomadic parents. People here keep livestock. I think probably the largest livestock concentration in the whole of Africa, probably is in the Horn of Africa region. So as I think around the late 1980s, people started going to school in this region. It was initially affected by conflicts and others, so it lagged behind the rest of Kenya. So I'm kind of the first generation to go to school in this region. And we were sort of, through a government initiative, caught from all the villages and taken to school. So that's how I ended up in getting to a formal school. And while I was after I finished my elementary school, I got an opportunity to visit the great Masai Mara. And I think that's where there was a turning point in my life to pursue a conservation career. I was deeply touched by what I saw in the Mara for the first time, coming from a very, arid and semi-arid region. Then I came to this area where we have huge concentration of large mammals, great diversity of life forms. And I saw the rangers and everything. And from that moment, I just wanted to be part of the people protecting biodiversity and the planet. And from that moment, when I finished high school, I joined the university to pursue a degree in wildlife biology. I was actually called into a law school, but I declined and joined conservation class. And it has never stopped. I'm still pursuing probably what I call the best career in the world. I think I'll get started. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here in this platform. My name is Abdullahi Ali. I'm a Kenyan conservationist based in Garissa. And today I'll talk to you about the Hirola antelope, which is an endangered species restricted to areas along the Kenya-Somali border. But before that, I just want to say 1 or 2 things about myself. I wear many hats. I'm the founder of the Hirola Conservation Program. I'm also the president, Kenyan chapter, Society for Conservation Biology. So if there are any students who would like to join the Kenyan chapter, Society for Conservation Biology, please get in touch with me, or you can find our contact on the social media, and we'll be happy to enroll you into our program. So yes, as I probably mentioned earlier, I was born in Garissa to a nomadic parents. This is actually the house of my father. He lives at the outskirts of Garissa and still practice nomadic lifestyle. He still have a very lovely bond with his cattle and goats and camels. So I was raised in this kind of rural setting. What you see on the left side it's called loh in Somali. It's what we usually use for writing. We don't usually use the pen and the paper that typically people use across the world, but here we use the loh for writing. And it's basically for learning Somali language and also Islamic culture. before we got into our formal government schools. And as I mentioned, here the communities are nomadic and they move from one point to another. It's an arid and semi-arid region, very dry, probably the driest part in Kenya. So there's a rainfall gradient in Kenya, and as you go east, it gets drier into Somalia, although the coastal parts are a bit different. So in this dry, arid landscape lives one of the most unique species. It's called the Hirola antelope. Others call it the four-eye antelope. Others refers this to the world's most endangered or the rarest antelope. And it's restricted to this part of the range. It has a small geographical range. They call it the four-eye antelope because of that what looks like an extra eye, and it's basically a gland. So from an evolutionary perspective, it's related to other antelopes in Africa. It's in the same family with wildebeest, topi, hartebeest, but it's sort of a relic species, which is evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered. It's critically endangered with less than 500 individuals of them left currently in the globe. There are none in captivity, and their population is just in the eastern Kenya, and some few have been translocated to Savo East National Park, which is outside the range. And that is the whole global population. So they are actually at the brink of extinction and without insurance elsewhere. So in terms of conservation status, the 280 in captivity, and their range you can see quite extensive all the way the southern African region. African wild similarly widespread, 3,000 to nearly 5,000 in the wild, 300 in captivity, and the range is widespread. Addax, which is another remaining in the wild, there are about 3,000 in the wild. But if you look at Hirola, there are about less than 500 individuals left in the wild, and you can see, how small their range is. They're that tiny. So Hirola entirely depends on grasslands. It's a grazer, purely dependent on grassland. They practice harem defense mating system, and they're seasonal breeders. Usually we have two rain seasons, either early April to May and November to December. So they synchronize their breeding season, and most of the calves are born during the short rains in October and November. So in terms of history, it was first described in the year 1888 by a British zoologist. Some of the initial conservation efforts included translocating them to Savo, which is a national park outside the range. The global population was then estimated at about 15,000. In 1973, the first protected area, Arawala National Reserve, was established, but this collapsed immediately. I mean, a decade later, because of the remoteness of this area and also insecurity in that region. In 1982, some populations were established in zoos across Europe and North America, but those populations also became non-viable afterwards because they were just dying because of either disease or stress. Then in 1985, there was a rinderpest outbreak, which is a bovine viral disease across the range. And the population continued to decline. In 2011, through range-wide aerial survey, we estimated the global population to be about 400 to 500 individuals. A predator-proof sanctuary was established then, and also the Hirola Conservation Program, which I ran, was established afterwards. So as you can see, Hirola are at the brink of extinction. So a key question will be, Why are they not able to bounce back? Why are they not doing so well? So Hirola decline coincided with elephant decline in this region. There are about 5,000 elephants co-occurring with Hirola in the 1980s, but because of the connection of this region to the Arabian Peninsula and at the height of poaching in Africa, there was massive poaching of elephants in this region. And elephants typically maintain habitats for Hirola. Elephants break and open up branches, trees, create corridors for Hirola and maintains the grasslands for Hirola. So as soon as the elephants were gone, then the Hirola declined also followed. And even after the rinderpest was eradicated, the recovery of Hirola was still was still very minimal. So a key question why, and we will see that along we'll see it during the presentation. So in terms of historical range, their historical range, which occurred on the Kenya-Somali border, was estimated to be about 40,000 kilometers squared. And you can see that polygon, black polygon on the right side of the map. And that was the sort of the historical range. And now they are almost, all these areas occur outside formerly government protected areas, and they're extinct in Somalia. So a key question will be why Hirola not able to recover. So for us to understand that, of course, habitat loss is a big issue for many mammals across the world. So we looked at the landscape, what has changed in the landscape, and we started with classifying satellite images from this region and looked at how the area was and what Hirola required to bounce back. So what you are seeing, this is the typical range of the geographical range of Hirola, and the polygon on the left side represent the geographical range of Hirola, and the green areas represent trees, and this is the 1980s. The linear feature you're seeing running from the bottom, left bottom, all the way up is Tana River, which is Kenya's longest river, about 1,000 kilometers, marks the western boundary of the Hirola's geographic range. And the brown areas are grasses, and Hirola depend on grasses. So we looked at, how has the landscape changed over the last 27 years or so. And by 2012, the whole area was massively encroached by tree cover. All the habitat was gone, suitable habitat, which is grassland. And as you can see, this represented like 300% increase in tree cover from 1985 to 2012. So that means that they have nowhere to call home, given that this is how the landscape has changed. All the grasses are gone, and they depend on these grasses. And so currently it's classified as a refugee species, and there are many other species that are classified as refugee species that are living in suboptimal habitat. So Hirola is barely hanging on this suboptimal habitat. And they're very, very sensitive to habitat quality. Body conditions significantly deteriorates with a level of habitat quality. When they have enough food, enough pasture, enough grass, they look, this elegantly built, strong antelope with big horns, with a lot of confidence and very good body conditions. But as soon as their food changes, they become weak, emaciated, and very, very, they become really, really weak and are susceptible to drought and very poor habitat quality. At some point, we compared the population growth rates of different rural populations in different settings. In predator-proof sanctuary, where we removed livestock, we removed predators. In community conservancy, where we had sort of a multiple land use area, and outside the conservancy in rangelands, typical rangelands, or the historical range. And you can see lambda was only about 1 in the predator-proof sanctuary, where we removed predators and we also minimized livestock competition. In the community conservancy, where we had predators and also some sort of a control for livestock, the population was not growing at all, but was fairly stable. But in the rangeland, you used to see there's a huge fluctuation in terms of population growth rate, and it's negative. So for endangered species to recover, we need an evidence-based approach. Conservation is expensive. It's quite expensive to do any intervention. So for us to succeed in recovering species, there has been a call to promote evidence-based conservation, where we understand the problem first scientifically, and then pour in the limited conservation. So one of the issues for rangelands, how do we, given that they occur completely outside communal areas, outside government protected areas, how do we support their habitat in rangelands, in rangelands, as their survival depend on the tolerance of the local communities. So governing rangeland was a key issue that we wanted to address. So we looked at whether people first supported some of the things that we will probably think we will need to minimize or improve the habitat for Hirola. And one of them was, for example, overgrazing, which was a key issue. And we asked communities whether they agree in reducing the number of livestock they own. And you can see A is agree, disagree, and neutral. So for the number of livestock you own, you see people are just disagreeing with that, and this is coming from the local communities. Do you support seeding and fertilization to improve range quality? And most people are saying, yes, we agree. We want you to improve the range quality. Okay. Do you support elephant conservation as a strategy to improve rangeland quality for Hirola? And people are enthusiastically supportive of having elephants back in this region. And these are potential solutions to improve the range. But of course, if, for example, people are against reducing the number of livestock they own, they are willing to have elephants, and each of these has its own challenges. This is a border region, it's a volatile region. It doesn't have any protected areas, formal government protected areas. Having elephants here, while it is possible, but logistically it's difficult and invisible. And this is how the typical range look like. It's massively encroached by these trees, which is Acacia reficens, and it's a common tree that has also engulfed other rangelands in northern Kenya and elsewhere in Eastern Africa. And it kind of covers the whole landscape. There's nothing that grows underneath, and it's an indigenous vegetation. So probably as a result of disturbances or loss of equilibrium in the soil or in the system, there's nothing that grows underneath. So there's no grass, there's no understory. And given that we lost the elephants, how do we do? How do we control these bushes? So in 2017, we started a massive landscape level restoration program where we are working with local communities to thin down trees, given that we don't have the elephants. We are working with local communities to thin down these trees. We also embarked on a soil seed bank study where we are looking at seed deposit across different soil types and see different foods, how they are present in these different soil types. And for you to do a successful restoration, it will likely to vary across soil types and also targeted species. And there are a variety of things that you can do to restore range, like manual removal of tree. You can use like grain, livestock grazing plants. You can use soil rippings. You can do seeding and fertilization. Elephant conservation and introduction. All these are potential solutions that work for Hirola. But we wanted to focus on the ones that we think are locally supported and also likely to succeed, given that these are communal areas. The support of the local communities is really, really key. So across different soil types, first we experimentally tested the responses of 4 native grasses to different restoration approaches: tilling, seeding, manure, and no treatment. And some of the responses that we are getting is quite good. This is one of the restored sites. As you can see, it's the grasses are. The response is really good, and these are species that can really support Hirola recovery. But we wanted to see how they will first appear, and we piloted in small experimental area. And the idea was we first test it in a smaller scale, and then develop an idea of how we can do it at a landscape level. And even at the landscape level, there's so many other barriers. There's a moisture barrier, there's seed issue, there's the soil capping issue. So there are different barriers that we need to cross. And given that it's an arid and semi-arid region, it will require that we select areas that are favorable with both favorable biotic and abiotic conditions. And it has been challenging with the ongoing droughts and the climate change that's happening in the Horn of Africa. And this is grass cover across soil types, and chloris, for example, is one of the most favorite species liked by Hirola. It's on the top of what it selects, and it's showing a good response across the soil types that we piloted. And of course, moisture is also something that's really key, and temperature in terms of when designing restoration efforts in this landscape. The temperatures vary significantly during the year, so timing some of these things is really important in designing a restoration program for a key species like Hirola. So this is one of our restoration plots, and you can see the grasses, quite good. And although this is during the rainy season, and the rainy seasons are really short here, 2 to 3 months, and then everything with us and everything goes. And so we are working with community conservancies across the Hirola geographic range to collect data and continue with restoring some of these areas. And we looked at whether they are responding to some of these restoration sites. And you can see this is one of our restored sites. And as soon as we have some extra grass there, they will show up and spend a lot of time there. So they are responding well to restoration. And the goal is, if we improve the food cover, if we improve the food, we're likely to improve the vital rates of these species. And vital rates, I mean by survival, recruitment, and pregnancy rates. All these are critical for you to fill in those gaps, for you to increase the population. And for us to do this, we first have to put the food on the table, which is the primary limiting factor for this species. Along with that, now the communities are able to harvest the grasses, from their farms. and have these seeds in their warehouses, and we are buying from them to put back into the landscape. So initially we were buying from Baringo, which is elsewhere in Kenya, on the western Kenya, or northwest Kenya. Now we're able to grow our own seeds, store, and put it back on the landscape. And that's also giving the communities some sort of a nature-based enterprise that we're able to collaborate through conservation and generate some income out of this. And we are working with local women groups to harvest the seeds, store them, and supply bags to the key critical habitat for Hirola. And as I said, elephants are not there. So for us to thin down these trees, we are using manual labor, where we are working with local communities to cut down these trees and thinly this invasive trees for Hirola to have open space, and also for it to have a space where the food can grow. So this is one of the communities that we are working with. They are just from clearing a field site and post for this field photo. With a weak system of governance for plan. Where we have local boards that oversee community ranges that are also able to protect, and each and every community has their own conditions. So that governance system is typically informed by the culture within the communities. There are tribal territories, there are even family territories within the area. There's sometimes when there are droughts, they allow extensive movement of livestock. But when food is abundant, they don't entertain encroachment of tribes from one area to another, to overstep or to move into the territory of another tribe. So we take all this into consideration when designing some of these grazing plans for respective community conservancies. So a key question will be, for example, how if see is improving, there's a lot of grass, how will you stop them from increasing their livestock and eventually coming back to where we were? Barren landscapes with very weak and emaciated livestock that are not even economically viable for them. And we're using, awareness and education, and they have witnessed over time. So we're able to have a conversation that's informed by this, historical landscape changes that they have seen, and highlighting also the plight of some of the species, wild animals that live in the midst of these communities, like the Hirola, that's almost starving to death because of some of these actions that have happened. So we're able to have, real conversation, and they're allowing the grasses to establish, persist, and possibly spread as soon as we establish. Otherwise, you might end up, establishing the grass, and as before even maturity or even the seeds fall on the ground, livestock pick it up, and you have not contributed much to the landscape. So we are working with these communities now to get that awareness for them to understand some of these challenges that are happening across the landscape, and for Hirola to recover. And now we are also restoring some of the historical ranges that have collapsed, like Hirola National Reserve, in partnership with the county government. And we have, ranges that are stationed and able to monitor nearly almost every individual of Hirola, either within the community conservancies or even outside, as the contribution of single individual with such low chronic numbers. The survival of every individual matters. So we are working with the local communities, to keep their ears and eyes on the ground, to raise any alarm as soon as they see in any of the landscape, whether it's a sick animal or a group that's spotted, and then we are able to monitor and see, how the population is some of these restoration efforts. Of course, the future of Hirola is in the natural environment. It depends. They need a viable, optimal landscape. This is a Hirola curve, and as soon as it got wind from the mother, 9 months or so, they need a landscape that can support them. And if that landscape doesn't have what they need, they will eventually, it will be a sink. They will just crash. So we are just making sure that the individuals that are born have a future, have a place where they can have food, and also it's open enough for them to see predators and to into the next stage, from calf to sub-adult to adult, and the adult successfully carrying a pregnancy rate, pregnancies for them to contribute to the population. And we are connecting all those dots to make sure that we are able to bolster the population across the landscape. So in partnership with KWS, we also have a recovery strategy that guides this. It addresses different aspects of the Hirola needs, in terms of whether it's research, whether it's community conservation development, whether it's restoration program. All this document, which has nationally been developed by the Kenya Wildlife Service in partnership with other stakeholders, carries all this. And when we are implementing some of this, it's usually things that have been recommended by experts and others, concentrated in this document, and different stakeholders are contributing to different parts of these documents. And of course, for a species to recover in the long term, it's not easy, and it will take several decades, and that will require a long-term commitment, conservation actions that meet the scale and the threats facing the species. Of course, we talked about evidence-based approach and adaptive framework with clear theory of change. We require also dedicated leadership that drives that vision, guide local communities, particularly for species outside formally government-protected areas, whose future depends on tolerance of local communities. And of course, you require funding and support. Of course, we all know that conservation funding is limited, and typically there's charge in terms of what to support and what to leave. So for a less charismatic species that's not well known, that doesn't occur in tourist destination, the public is not aware of course, fundraising becomes a key issue, a key obstacle that you need to overcome. And Hirola is one of those less known, less charismatic species that probably many people have never seen in the wild. And it requires champions to come out and speak about the plight of these species. Of course, there's no other reason to believe that local communities to believe that other people are better at solving problems than the people on the spot. And I have a lot of faith working with local communities and devolving those level to succeed for the species to recover. Yeah, with that, I would like to stop there and thank generous supporters and funders throughout my conservation journey. And from there, I will take questions. Thank you.
Really, we commend you for everything that you're doing. It's remarkable, remarkable work and a remarkable presentation. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I don't see any questions yet on the floor. Here's one from David Jones. We are so used to assuming that the more trees, the better, and this is very interesting. What is the name of the offending trees? So I would just like to know what invasive trees are growing there.
So it's the primary bush. About 40% of this bush that's threatening Hirola is from one individual tree called Acacia reficiens. And it doesn't have a very good use, as the branches are very thin, so it's not really good for charcoal. And it's mostly commonly used by the communities for creating bomas or carols for their livestock. But we are thinking hard to come up with solutions. Probably most likely, we are thinking of energy efficient charcoal, or that we can probably make out of this and sell to hotels at a cost, given that we are closer to a big tourist destination like the coast in Kenya, and to supply those hotels, and probably also just for local consumption, if we were able to bring a market strategy to penetrate the local market, and share the story that if you buy this charcoal, you're saving the species. So we are thinking along those lines, but it hasn't taken shape yet.
Yeah, but I agree with that. I think it's the one man's trash is another man's treasure, and it can turn into a win-win situation. Since you need to get rid of it, if there's benefits to it, somebody else might actually want it. I don't see any more questions.
One other species that's also common is it's called Leucaena inamis. It's used for henna. Henna is a sort of a local tattoo used mostly by women in Asia and Middle East and the Horn of Africa. And one of the trees that produces that is one of the trees affecting Hirola, and this huge market for it. So we're also thinking on how we will integrate that market-driven ideas into our solutions for Hirola.
No, that's interesting. I'm actually wearing it. You can see I'm actually wearing it now. I didn't know. I didn't ever think that it comes from trees. I never thought about it. So that's interesting to know. Okay, I don't. Okay, Holly.
So I just want to they're not really questions, but Dr. Ali, I wonder if I came across this phenomenon that I had no idea about, but apparently in the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, there is this movement to cut down trees, i.e. a hobby. So you become a professional woodcutter, and people book woodcutting holidays to places where land needs to be cleared. Obviously, it is all sustainable, and they work on that. Instead of thinking of charcoal, because charcoal is quite a difficult thing, like you say, it's not so good. The trees are not so good to make the charcoal, but also then how do you say that charcoal really came from a species like Prosopis or Rectins that needs to be cleared? Whereas if you did a tourist paying program where they're the ones who are clearing the land and doing the hard work because they just like to cut wood and be better at it. It might be some sort of, you know, the national Hirola games where, you know, you compete, something like that. So that's just an anecdote. I don't know if you've ever come across a professional woodcutter from the Nordic countries, Dr. Ali?
No, it's a brilliant idea. I've never thought of it. I had one or two volunteers who will say, you know, we want to come down and help you cut those trees, but not to such an organized way. Unfortunately, we are not a tourist destination area, and there are often travel restrictions in our area because of the Somali border. And yeah, it has not been easy to do a lot of some of these citizen science ideas that often involve you know, foreigners and people who have taken holidays off and want to contribute. But I will, you know, actively think about it, and if you're able to share with me the links of those groups or how I can get
I'll have to look them up, Dr. Ali, but then I think you put in a second stage, because there is also this type of tourism that is I survived. So, you know, there's even the merchandise that I survived Colombia and the drug cartels. You know, you go to Colombia, you travel down the river, and you get a shirt that says I survived Colombia and the drug cartels. You know, it's almost that thing, I survived the Somali border, you know, even though it's like a bit of a joke, because look at all the shootings in America and they don't put travel restrictions on America. You know, it's almost ridiculous. For us in Kenya and South Africa, you have it as well, where suddenly all these restrictions come on. And for what? Have you seen how many people are shot dead just going to school in America?
Yeah.
So, you know, you could also create this kind of tourism where it's like, yeah, you take a risk, but if you're not going to take a risk, well, how is this species going to survive? So before I move on, and I see Nikki has a question, just one last thing is to say to all students, you know, this is really something, and I know that at some point you might be tested, because Dr. Ali, I don't know if you realize, but the students are getting examined on some of the content of your talk. So I'm just so impressed. Sorry, Nikki, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for that wonderful presentation. Just a question. From what I've seen, you have talked about what relates to the ecology of this antelope. Have you considered some behavioral aspects that is also making this antelope vulnerable and also driving it to extinction?
Thank you. So there's a lot of, as I said, habitat is a big issue for many mammals. In fact, about 40% of IUCN red listed species, habitat is the primary issue. There are a lot of other suggestions, like people saying, you know, predators are taking down these antelopes. You know, but it's hard to imagine a scenario in which, you know, a native predator will drive a native prey to extinction without additional perturbations. Of course, there are things like apparent competition. You know, there are huge topies, huge numbers of topies in coastal area. I come close to the Hirola and the elephants. I mean, there are lions in that area. So the topics attract the lions, and then they may eventually go down with Hirola. But these are sort of approximate factors and not ultimate factors. And this is the native range of this species. I don't think there's any reason to believe that there are some specific behavioral issues that are affecting these species that are driving them to extinction. Of course, this is where they lived for millennia. It's not a new area, but these predators are the same. They have not increased. It's only the habitat that has changed. But having said that, there are a lot of speculations that the calves sleep. There are others who will say it's easy to catch Hirola. Actually, they call it swara mjinga, meaning the stupid antelope, because the lions are able to get it. Yes. But they have been here for over 3 million years ago. For 3 million years. Was it last year? There's a time I was trying to think about, wanted to focus on just juvenile survival alone and see, how they transition, given that they give birth during the wet season. And you'll see calves, but somehow those calves disappear at some point. And we are not able to get every aspect of what is happening in the landscape. But for now, we are focusing on that bigger picture, which is just shaping up the habitat to what it was, and then eventually recruit more students to fill in the gaps on some of these other theories that people have fronted.
Okay, thank you, Mickey, and thank you, Dr. Ali. On that, did you mention how long they live and the gestation period?
Gestation period is 8 months, and they in the wild we don't know how long they live. Probably 10 to 12 years.
It's a short life.
Yes, short life.
So referring to your last slide, where you said that there are no protected areas. There's no legislation in practice.
So it's a community. Them. It's a community protected areas, not. So
it's community, not legis. Yeah.
Community protected.
So just worst case scenario. Are there any? We have rehabilitation centers, and we have, which I'm not too keen on, but we have zoos that are protecting individuals, like low numbers of individuals. Is there any way that there's individuals being protected? Like maybe 5 or so, 10 or so. Like once, if it should reach worst case scenario, will that mean that the species is depleted?
I'm not sure I got your question. So you're asking if we can establish other populations elsewhere?
No, I'm asking, is there a backup plan? Like, are they, not, I don't mean in terms of the species as a whole. I'm speaking about individuals within the species. Sometimes they protect, like we have the cheetah parks here in South Africa, and there are individuals there. Those cheetahs are the ones that's being protected as the population decreased. So there's maybe, I'm just using a random number, 10 of them being protected. Are there a number of antelope being protected?
What would be the purpose of protection, for breeding or?
Yeah, just to have, breeding, genetic, maintaining the genetics of it for the future.
Yeah, Hirola has a bit of history. In the 1960s, the first conservation effort was to translocate them outside their native range. So there was a hostility that developed between the government and the local communities, given that the government was just coming with choppers and picking them to take them elsewhere. So it has not been easy to do any further interventions outside the range, given that the communities were polarized by then. And they are protecting themselves. and so any intervention outside where they are is not likely to succeed because of lack of local support. But within the conservation areas, I'm not sure if it makes sense to have few individuals protected. Probably, if we could establish more protected areas for the existing population, probably that will sound more realistic to me.
I hear you.
And
so the best way for this protection is just to restore the habitat.
Yeah, restore the habitat and just make sure they're able to survive in their native range and address some of those threats that are continuing. Of course, if we had like an outside population that is able to augment this population, will have been better.
Yeah.
But that's not a possibility. It's not a possibility. Not a possibility. No.
Okay, before I go on, let me just go. Holly, you have a question, and after that, we'll go to you, Sharon.
I think first to Sharon, seeing as I'm not an ANU student. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you. I'm also not I'm an ANU teacher, not a student, but thank you, Holly. And thank you, Dr. Ali. We really enjoyed your talk. It's great and it's amazing what you're doing. I have two questions for you. My first question is to do with those trees. I think Aisha might have asked, but is there an alternative purpose those trees can serve so that the community can benefit from them in terms of, some of the products they might be able to harvest from the trees, medicinal or gum or something like that. And then, it will incentivize them to kind of make use of those trees even as they are restoring the habitat. And then my second question is, do you have need of students to come and help you in your research? Because I'm sure that some of my students here would be happy to connect with you and come and join, even if it's for an internship or to be one of your field assistants or in whichever capacity they can learn. So I just wondered if you have that opportunity for them. Thank you.
Thank you. So great questions. So in terms of the trees, of course, for now, we have focused on some of the key trees, which one being Acacia reficens and the other one being the Hina tree. Acacia reficens, as I mentioned, of course, we are exploring, what it can provide. That's excessive biomass that we don't know what to do with it. It's covering the entire landscape and coupled with even prosopis. And I think the key strategy at this point is control through utilization, whichever way. We haven't figured out exactly what are the details of this. We don't have like a business plan on what we can get out of this. And we probably need the students to come and help us on that. But it's something I am positive that the communities can utilize, and we can generate some resources out of those trees and eventually help create more habitat for this species. Briquettes is one idea that was floated by multiple people to me from the Acacia reficens, and we haven't designed like the whole idea of how cost effective if the machines are able to work in remote areas like that. if you know, it will be, if you can design like a cheap, affordable technology that can work in rural setting, and you know, ordinary farmers or pastoralists can utilize and supply the market. I think it's an assignment that we have to do. But definitely we are thinking creating products out of those trees, and probably in the next few years we will have an industry, a whole industry out of this, and I'm hoping it will work. In terms of whether we need students, yes, certainly we need. Of course, conservation requires many hands, and there are many loopholes to fill in, and there's always a gap, whether it's you know, monitoring data, or you know, even cutting those trees, or taking photographs of Hirola. There's often site-to-site studies that we do, where we go back and see the groups and see if the calves are still there. So there are a couple of interesting things that we could do together with students. So anyone who is interested, please send my way, and I'll be happy to guide.
Okay, thank you. Holly?
Yes, and then I think definitely after me, we'd like to unmute Joel to tell us a little bit more of the Grevi Zebra Trust and how what you've heard today from Dr. Ali might translate to some of the work you're doing. But Dr. Ali, my question is pretty much the difference between community-driven conservation and, you know, community engagement. Because let's be honest, half of what goes on across our continent is community engagement. It is almost lip service. It's, yes, we have negotiated with the community, but we have not negotiated within the community. What it appears to me, and my question to you is to confirm what you feel about this, is the project you have started is a true community-driven project. You are from the area, your heritage comes from the area, your future is in the area. I imagine you don't, you know, travel and things with your work now, but that is home to you. That the people you are bringing into this project are Kenyan Somalis who are there, who want to be part of that because it is their land, it is their heritage. And like Dr. Sharon said, yes, you're, you know, would be open to accepting students to come and do internship, but the true future of that species and those communities lies with the people that live there, not the people coming in from outside. What do you feel, or how would you come back at me with that, Dr. Ali?
Thank you. I think you have rightly put it. The whole of our initiative is indigenous-led, from the bottom all the way up. It's one of the few projects in conservation projects that is, you know, well rooted locally, and of course the future and everything is for the local communities to get capacity, for the communities that are there to get capacity to manage their resources. And whether it's the scientist or the manager or the rangers, all of them need to be developed locally. And it's a problem elsewhere in Africa. There's a lot of you know, parachute conservation where you rely on external solutions, but often that will eventually go, and we, you know, the locals have not developed the right capacity. They often relied on external hand, and yeah, you know, at some point the whole thing might collapse, given that it's not 100% homegrown. And of course, I envisioned that, and I've seen that in different settings, and I'm very keen to see this packaged as a, you know, local solution, hormone, and this, you know, at the center of the local communities. In terms of students, I think it's just knowledge sharing. I don't see a problem. They come from elsewhere or not. It's as a scientist, scientists are very generous people. So we share information, we share data, we train anyone who is interested in learning. So if a student is interested for internship, I have several others from different other universities in Kenya now. I don't see it as a problem at all.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Dr. Ali. And for the students here, you know, this bottom-up approach is just so critical, and it's something we really are not seeing enough of. Right, over to you, Joel. Joel, are you there? I'm asking you to unmute. Oh yeah, you're there. No? Okay, there's a question from Joel in the chat box. Are communities practicing? Oh, he's here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Ali. I'm so incredible for this talk. And as I said before, I work with Great Separate Trust and also African Nazarene University. I'm so happy to hear about the land restoration. It's something that also we do as an organization. And I've seen some very important kind of aspects on land restoration. And to Ali, how does communities actually take on, you said maybe if elephants are allowed to dominate the landscape, do they actually take it positively or they take it as a challenge to their livestock?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joel. Elephants have been part of that system for a very long time. Most of the elders have seen it. I personally saw it when I was young. I think I was probably 5 or so years. I've never seen them again, except recently when they are recolonizing back the landscape.
Dr. Ali, I think you're breaking up.
Network, I think.
Seeing elephants back in their landscape. And the elephants. So the communities now are supportive of seeing the elephants back in their landscape. But these are community conservancies. So they, of course, there's a lot of changes in terms of culture. People are pastoralism is no longer viable. People are talking about tourism development, all that. So elephants, people are really keen to have elephants. But of course, elephants require a lot of protection. If they are unable to survive inside national parks, you will imagine, in communal areas along the Somali border, it will be, a long shot. So while they are naturally colonizing and we're encouraging communities to host elephants, it is probably a difficult thing to see it happen in the long term. Or in the short term, I would say, until things might change or keen to have elephants back in the system, both for tourism purposes and also for improving the landscape, given that they have witnessed range degradation through time in this landscape, and they have learned that range degradation is reversible, and elephants is one of the solutions. So now everybody is on board with the knowledge and the ideas that we are able to improve the range and restore back the local livelihoods.
So, Dr. Ali, because this is community driven and community protected, I'm talking now about the human beings, have they been trained in any way to protect, or is it natural, Like, do they use their intuition? Have they gotten training?
It's a community conservancies. So for every community conservancies, we work with range technicians and the wider community. The specific technicians we train on, restoration techniques, and there's the wider group that we use for things like cutting down trees that doesn't require a lot of skills. So there's some that we have trained with skills, and others that we just interact, and they're able to do whatever we say. Others have also seen and believed. Seeing is believing.
Yeah, but I'm referring to something like if elephants are sort of reintroduced or repopulating the area, and because they're getting poached so highly, are the rangers?
Oh yes, the rangers have trainings, but for you to protect elephants, you require a lot of coordination. Early warning detection system, drones, and all that. I don't think they have that capacity. And for now, as soon as we see, we just liaise with Kenya Wildlife Service, and sometimes they're pushed back into the neighboring national parks.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you.
Dr. Do the communities accept to reduce the number of the livestock when that approach came into terms of land management? Because where I work, because I'm just in northern Kenya, and we have seen the challenge of huge livestock, especially the small stock, that's goats and sheep. That's so many of them, and we have seen that that's the main threat on land on the landscape. There's a lot of overgrazing and poor kind of land grazing. And I've seen you mention that for doing that kind of livestock reduction, how do they take that when you try to sell that to them?
Of course, it doesn't make sense if you tell a pastoralist to reduce their livestock. So they are not very supportive of reducing their livestock at this point. And that was like, some other at our entry point, when they didn't have a lot of awareness, when they didn't have a lot of knowledge about rangeland restoration and some of the key drivers of range degradation. We haven't gone back to them and see if the situation has changed yet, but I'm assuming there'll be a partial change given what they have seen and the losses they go through when having these huge, livestock numbers and with the ever-recurring droughts in this region. But the first thinking was, no, we will not reduce our livestock.
Can I follow up on your question there, Joel, and keep your microphone on because you can interrupt me. But I remember speaking, now it was a while ago, it was when the clashes were happening. And there was a lady from northern Kenya who was saying something very interesting. And Dr. Ali, I wonder if this is the same case, that in northern Kenya, especially Laikipia, which we call northern Kenya, which isn't really northern Kenya, but that's the way it's ended up. A lot of the actual volume of livestock, so the head, are actually owned by family members who have made it and left those areas and are now living either abroad. Surprisingly, there were a few from abroad and a few in Nairobi, but they were investing in livestock as a form of security. Now, who was caring for that livestock was community members, but their family members. Now, the research that was being done is education is, of course, a means out of depending on livestock for your survival. But if a family member is hiring you to care for the larger number of livestock, it is actually in their interest to keep you at a certain, I would like to say, intellectual poverty level, that you are happy to go and care for livestock every single day. And so the research was, how do we stop the people who have moved away from the community investing in livestock in their home area as a way to invest in wealth, I guess. I don't know if that is happening in your area, Dr. Ali.
I don't think so. Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I can see it happening. But that is not the situation in northeastern Kenya. As livestock is the owners are there, and when you give to a person, somebody else to take care of it, there are a lot of challenges. There are daily losses, there are attacks that happen, there's watering decisions that need to be made. The landscape is a lot more difficult in our area than probably it is in Laikipia. So the owner really needs to be there for him to make those decisions.
And again, that brings me to this fact of community driven, because it is a lot easier to deal or to work and create something that you have created, is it not, when everybody is there? Whereas I feel like in Laikipia, there's a lot of owners of livestock that don't even live there or come there maybe once a year.
Yeah, so there's typically, you can hire an assistant to help you, but you have to be there. You have to be there. And mostly it's elderly people who have nothing else to do and have retired, on livestock production. And the others who have never seen even town or anything, and they don't have any family member elsewhere. They're just, that's their world. And the majority are like that.
Thank you. Joel, do you want to come in on any of that with your own experiences in northern Kenya, or we're almost wrapping up the session, I think, now?
Yeah, I think with that, there's no more questions in the chat and there's no hands up. So I think it is time to wrap up. Yeah, Dr. Ali, I'm just thinking, looking at your background, your past, and the resilience that you had to face to get where you are today. I mean, you really started from, like I said earlier, humble beginnings, and you made it all the way and you got your doctorate and you're working now, making this phenomenal changes. I mean, it's not, there's conservation and then there's what you are doing, which is a bit more trickier given the population size, given that it's an endemic species. I think that the resilience that you build up over the years, I think you're in a perfect position to actually make a success of this. So looking at the past, looking at what you're doing currently, and then some of these ideas that I think came up today and that I think you can foresee for the future.